All right, welcome back to Opening the C-Suite. I'm Mike.
Corey?
And we've got another audience requested topic that was not in our originally planned queue. And this can be a tough one as well. How to fire an executive. We're talking about senior level, oftentimes packed resume individual, and for whatever reason not working out in this situation, and how a CEO identifies and thinks through this. Now, our audience members came to you, Corey, with this question. So maybe if you can lay the groundwork, what were the questions? Was it as simple as how do you fire an executive? And then maybe what are some of the situations that you've seen where this becomes now what the board or the C-suite is talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the basics of it, the questions are like, well, where do I start? Is it just about letting them go? Where do I look for? Do I replace them first?
Yeah.
Like, I think I've come to the conclusion I have to let them go. Now what?
Yeah.
Effectively where it starts. And Mike, you've lived in that.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So first, how did you reach the conclusion you had to let an executive go?
Yeah. So my context here, probably not as many situations as you've had, but they've tend to be this situational thing where, now I'm not saying there haven't been scenarios where it's a skill set kind of thing or a culture match, but we as a startup, as we were growing, had multiple cases where even in some situations, a kind of previous advisor type friend joins in an operating role. And the situation that we have as a, at the time, 40, 50 person company is totally different than if, let's say, they came from a larger company. And maybe we thought the industry is matching up. Maybe we thought the type of sale was matching up, but the company size was different. Or the company size is similar, but the industry is different.
Right.
So I think at the startup level, one of the biggest challenges is that it's so hard to go out and find really top-notch talent that can come add to your mission, in part because their compensation is going to come from a future reward that's not yet proven out, right? Because you're not going to pay market rates on cash.
No.
So you have this equity comp. So you end up finding somebody who's so excited about it, and situationally, maybe it's just not a match for what was driving their success to get to a really high level in another market or another company size. So the identification, I mean, the data points come from a variety, if it's a culture thing, maybe it's coming from the team.
Right.
Certainly if it's, results oriented, that's coming from the bottom line. But I find it's really hard to identify it, at least early enough. Like every time I thought, I could have seen this, 2-3 months ago. Sometimes it was like, so obvious that we have to move, but really difficult then to move forward on, because in some cases you're kind of isolated as the CEO. I know I had co-founders and so maybe I had a smaller tight-knit group, but if this is one of your senior executives and that's your tight-knit group as a CEO, it's not like you're having an exec team meeting about this, right? So how have you gone about, once you identified it, now the execution of your decision?
Yeah, and I had a CEO I worked with make a statement to me, never fired someone too soon. Typically too late.
But for them too, by the way, because if it's the wrong situation,
that's right.
They're a successful individual. They want to move on.
But their job is to hold on. Our job is to hold on. We don't want to think we hired wrong. They don't want to think they're doing a bad job, right? So everyone's coming at it from the best angle. Reaching that decision, really hard, a lot of tossing and turning. It's never a perfect decision, but if you really think it may not be the right person, in all the years I've seen only one executive turn around and suddenly be a great exec in that company. So usually if the thought is there, start thinking about the plan. And so you asked about the plan. First and foremost, why I see people not actually let an executive go is they worry it's going to be on their shoulders now. Oh, if I get rid of my head of blank, I'm going to have to do everything she does. And I don't, how am I going to do that?
And in part because you used to be the one doing it from a startup standpoint.
Right.
So I can relate with that. Yeah.
So the question one is this a let them go and replace them afterward? Is this search for the person, the replacement, and bring them in? Is this an internal promotion? Is this a reorg? Right? There are some times when letting a person go and the executive team is an opportunity to restructure an executive team. There is times where you have a good person at the next level down and it's time to move them up. I had a situation where I had let an executive go and we had a person who was level or so down in the org wasn't ready for the top job, but really raised their hand for kind of that next. So we reorged the structure of the team to give that person a little bit more of a role, even though they got a new boss, right? So, don't let a crisis go unused.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to rethink things. It doesn't have to be just a swap. I am a fan of having the new person figured out before you let the other person go.
Yeah.
But that assumes it's not a dire situation. They're not doing damage to the organization. You're not causing other people to leave the organization, right? It's all of those things in place.
Well, one thing I'll interject on that is, so there's two scenarios, right, of by which somebody became a senior executive.
Yep.
One is the upward growth, and the next is the outside hire. When you ask the question, the outside hire is what came to my mind, and part of the challenge here is, yes, there's the question of, well, am I now having to do all of the work of that role?
Yeah.
But there's also, I can remember for me, remembering the celebratory announcements internally and sometimes public facing of this, senior type person having joined the team. So when the hire is made, it's this credibility adding, step and milestone. Okay, we're getting to be legit.
Yeah.
And then if it's not working, well, all of a sudden, all of that past messaging kind of come. You're at least thinking in your head, is that going to come crashing down on me? And I think to your point of, you've only seen it, not or
turn around.
Seen it turn around one time, so you never felt like you made the wrong termination decision. I've always felt better and had the team, come and say, okay, yeah, we were kind of seeing too, love the individual, but it wasn't working out. And so like those fears of everything's going to crash down, end up being kind of empty voices in your head. But that can stall you weeks or months. And if it's a senior executive, it's also an expensive cost on the model.
Well,
and so you can't really wait too long.
And it's not, the financial cost is very real, but the reason you're thinking about letting them go is they're doing something you don't like in the organization.
Yeah, right.
So there is some organizational cost. I have typically found if I held on to an executive too long, you lost credibility with people on the team. I had one person one time directly say, why did you leave so-and-so in that position so long?
Yeah.
Didn't you see it?
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, sometimes you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to see.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to go behind an executive's back when you want to let them run their teams and learn.
Right.
So you have to do a lot of organizational, I'll use the term interrogation, but it's really a lot of organizational listening to get information to come to the conclusion to make the change. But so often everybody goes, yeah, it makes sense.
Saw it coming.
And by the way, there are the situations where the person is blindsided. They never saw it coming. Those are hard to get through, but you get through them just the same.
Yeah, right.
But, so step one, come to the conclusion. If you're having doubts, spend some time, do the old list, like what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, right? But once you then conclude, I'm going to make a change on this executive, the next thing to figure out is, so how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
Are we going to reorg? Are we going to promote somebody? Are we going to go outside? And every time I've chosen to swap out an executive, I begin to talk to the board. Not in a formal board meeting, in informal conversations, but let them know we're going to make this change.
Yeah.
First question they're going to ask you, how are you going to do it? What does it mean?
Yeah.
And they should typically ask, and what's their severance? What's going to cost? What's the hit on the model?
Yeah, right.
Financial model of the organization, right? So know those things going in, but you want to preview it with them. And then you got to go through those steps of either getting a recruiter or going out and finding people.
Yeah. Let me ask you this even before the steps afterwards. So, an ordinary employee, you may expect a period of, performance improvement plan or something like that. Does a senior executive get the same expectations?
I've never done it.
Okay, never. No,
I
there's no
haven't.
Senior exec PIP.
Not in a PIP. I would have had a hard conversation with them.
Yeah.
Hey, this isn't going well. Don't like how this is going.
Yeah.
This is really bugging me. I've gotten feedback from the team A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Those conversations. Is it ever a formal bring in HR and document the PIP? I've never done that.
Just different set of expectations.
Different set of
Different
expectations. And the reality is, when I am having those hard conversations, I probably could do a PIP at that point, but you just treat an executive slightly differently. You're not.
Well, it's not the impact of
that.
one individual. It's the impact, like you said, of now this whole umbrella.
That's right.
And, again, maybe in some cases it's that there's a culture problem, but in many cases, it's a good individual, but it's whatever's happening is negatively impacting.
That's right.
Company in that umbrella. And so to say, well, it's fair to the individual to do, 30, 60, 90 day improvement plan is one lens.
Yep.
But then what's the impact, like you're saying, of the 30, 60, 90 individuals maybe under that umbrella? And
That's
so
right.
those are the decisions I think you're weighing as the CEO.
I've also found every executive has that confidant in their team, right? They all have that person they're really close to.
Yeah.
And when you tell them they're on a PIP, they're going to tell their confidant.
Right.
Problem is their confidant tends to have a confidant.
Yeah, right.
And next thing you know, 5 people adhere to this in the
yeah,
organization,
yeah.
right? So that's why you're a bit more definitive. It's not that you don't deliver them hard feedback. It's not that you don't tell them that there's a problem.
Yeah.
When you do let them go, it shouldn't be a surprise. Sometimes it is, but it shouldn't, because you've had those conversations if it's performance led. In which case, they should go, well, we've been talking about this.
Yeah, sure.
They might be upset, but talking.
Yeah.
The times it is a surprise is when it's like a cost cutting or a big restructuring.
Yeah.
In which case, that just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's and maybe you've chosen to get out of that line of business and don't need that executive anymore or something like that, right? So that's when I would expect the surprise. But if it's performance driven, you need to have been a good leader for that person and given them that feedback so it's not a surprise.
Yeah. Now, are there any most common themes that you've experienced of why it's not working out with a senior most executive?
Some are too much the doers and not the leaders.
Okay.
That's
like an
pretty common
internal
one.
promotion path, probably.
And sometimes they've come from the outside. They held the role at another company and they had that problem at that company, but doesn't show up nicely in the resume or an interview because
right.
they can tell you all the things to do and they can tell you the programs that were implemented. And when you get there, you're like, oh, they're not leading people.
Which, just again, to pause on that's another story. They're more of a doer than the manager or delegator. Again, it goes to like a lot of times it's going to be a good person who's working hard.
That's
and
right.
It just adds to the degree of challenge that you're going to have then as a CEO of coming to the conclusion. Because you're looking at it, wow, so-and-so's working so hard. They're doing how could I let them go when they're doing all this? But what you're saying is you're negatively impacting the whole department by manually doing those things and not managing. So it's a different way to look at it.
Or negatively impacting by just managing and not the doing. That's the other side of it, right? So I have found situations where the person is not evolved into a leader. Yeah. Or they've evolved so much in the leader they no longer do. Yeah. And they kind of lack the practical understanding. They lack the appreciation from the team. So, situation I've run into with a company I've been involved with where really good executive, put good processes in place, did really good stuff, but just kind of separate from the team now, kind of doesn't understand what's going on the day to day. But you go, wow, but these processes didn't exist before. I feel really good about that. But I see these problems, but I don't want to lose those, right? You can talk yourself out of making a hard change. Yeah. So, those are kind of 2 big categories. They're really still a doer. They're not really a group leader, or they've moved so high that they've lost track of the details, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 people in the org are doing the work. When I was at a public company, our CEO had talked about how he had fired a previous CFO. Okay. And he said, I realized that every time I wanted information, I didn't go to the CFO's office. I went to somebody else.
Yeah, interesting.
And he's like, after about 2 months of this, I'm like, why am I not going to that office and I'm going to this office every time?
Right, yeah.
He's like, and that was just the trigger. Like, do I need this person? He's not a bad guy, but he doesn't have what I need.
Yeah, it wasn't working. So in that case, I was curious. Another question. You mentioned that example with 2 months or so. In the scenario of somebody who's been hired into the role, or could be promoted, there's obviously going to be a range of time that goes by to make your observation as CEO. Yep. But how early is too early? Can you know on day one? Do you need 3 months?
If you know on day one, some people do. Something went wrong in the hiring process, right? 6 to 9 months is when you start having that feeling. Usually by a year, you should have a really good feel. And maybe you got a few things off, but you see the coaching and the person can get there, right? Okay. But if you kind of get through that first year with the person, probably doing a lot of the right stuff. It's not to say they're going to be there forever, and you may not get to a different point or run into a different challenge as the company changes and grows. But that 6 to 9 months is when you should start saying,
still a long period of time if it was the wrong,
which is why the hiring decision matters so much.
6 to 9 months of, just take a sample, 50 people in that department. Yeah. Something, and not to say it's like black and white of it's all wrong or it's all right. That's right. But 6 or 9 months of some major department not operating at what you believe its optimal state should be. Yeah. That's such a high cost.
That's right.
Which brings you to why you have to move fast when you've got the data points. Now, how do you help this individual then afterward, if it's something worth, that type of post the role at your company partnership? Like, how do you keep everybody like remain in good face publicly?
A lot of it is you first off, when you announce to the company, you announce it in an appropriate way, meaning so and so is no longer with us because of these changes we've decided to make as an organization. Keep it more generic. I've seen some harsh. You can burn the bridge. I'm not going to say you can't.
Of inappropriate behavior or something.
Totally different story.
That's a different scenario.
Totally different scenario. This is we've outgrown our executive X. I would never put into print we've outgrown that executive. What I would say is we've determined that the organization now requires these skill sets, and therefore we found this leader. So the really important part of that is knowing what your plan is next. You don't let a person go and not have a plan. Right? Because you then contextualize why they're let go by what changes you've made. But if you're just letting them go, then it clearly is performance driven. It clearly is a problem with that person. And by the way, if it is something nefarious, if it is something illegal, then do it. Like they're gone. Don't worry about it. That's okay. And if it sullies the reputation, it's okay also, because that's why it's going on. But that's part of the reason you have to have that what next figured out, because it helps with the announcement. And it helps move the organization to the next phase. You want it to be 48, 72 hours while people are going, wow, what just happened, to, okay, what are we doing now? You don't want it to be months of waiting for a new executive, temporary. And unfortunately, I've had that. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you try to minimize it.
So interesting to cover this topic, and that's all the time we have for this one, but the topic of when a senior executive does not work out, because a later episode we'll cover is now how to make the decision of internal promotion versus external hire. But for now, that's...
well, one last thing to touch on is there's also the announcing of it. You really not just want to preview with the board, you want to preview with other executives. You don't want to blindside them. And the key people in that person's organization you should talk to in advance. And lastly, don't outsource the conversation. If you're going to let that executive go, you have the conversation with them. They deserve it. You should be doing it. Give them the feedback. It's not that you're going to give a full performance review, but just give them, this is the facts, this is what's happening. And I will always say, treat people as best you can in that moment. It comes back in a good way if you treat people well at that point in time.
All right, that's it. Let go of a senior executive.
Thanks.